by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GBNews,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, the UK has helped pass the first UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. I'm asking you, was that the right move or not? Also, are these votes meaningless or meaningful? Will they actually change anything at all? Also, speaking of Gaza, Luton Town Hall has been flying the Palestinian flag. I can tell you now, opinion on that one is certainly divided. Where are you on it? Also, UK housing has been described as the worst value for money of any advanced economy. What on earth has gone wrong here? And Age UK have warned that the increasing digitisation of pretty much everything, quite frankly, is alienating the elderly. Do you agree with that or not? And my favourite story, I've been desperate to talk to you about this for 3 days now. Tonight, finally, will be my chance. Some criminals will be required to wear high-vis jackets now and clean up the communities that they have damaged. I think this is absolutely fabulous. But other people are saying it's wrong to humiliate the criminals this way. Your thoughts? We'll get stuck into all of that and more, but before we do, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. In the United States tonight, President Biden says the search and rescue operation is the top priority after a ship crashed into Baltimore's main bridge, with all traffic now into the busy port remaining on hold. If you're watching on television, this is the moment. The Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore was hit at around 1:30 in the morning local time, plunging cars, their drivers and road workers into the water below with no warning. The ship's crew, we understand, had notified the authorities of what's being described as a power outage on board, prompting construction workers on the bridge at the time to try to stop more traffic from driving onto the collapsing bridge. Let's show you the scene in Baltimore this afternoon, where those 6 construction workers remain unaccounted for. President Biden has promised an immediate response from the federal government.
We're going to send all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency. And I mean all the federal resources. And we're going to rebuild that port together. Everything so far indicates that this was a terrible accident. At this time, we have no other indication, no other reason to believe there's any intentional act here. Personnel on board the ship were able to alert the Maryland Department of Transportation that they had lost control of their vessel, as you all know and reported. As a result, local authorities were able to close the bridge to traffic before the bridge was struck, which undoubtedly saved lives.
President Biden talking about the Baltimore Bridge collapse there. Now, here at home, a former British Museum curator has been ordered by the High Court to return stolen artefacts within 4 weeks. Dr. Peter Higgs, who was dismissed for misconduct, faces allegations of theft and damage to over 1,800 historical items, accusations he denies. The courts also ordered Mr. Higgs to disclose records from his eBay and PayPal accounts, following claims he listed the hundreds of stolen items for sale online. The director of Russia's security service says the UK, Ukraine and the United States are responsible for last week's terror attack near Moscow, though he provided absolutely no evidence. At least 139 people lost their lives when gunmen stormed a concert hall on Friday, and the terror group Islamic State claimed responsibility. Russian President Vladimir Putin has admitted that radical Islamists carried out the attack, but continues to insist that Ukraine was involved, allegations Kyiv denies. GB News can reveal today the number of small boats crossing the English Channel so far this year is now 25% higher than at the same point last year. Another 5 small boats made the crossing this morning, with almost 300 illegal migrants on board, including a number of children. It takes the total number of migrants who've made the dangerous journey so far this year to just under 4,600. That's up from 3,700 at the same point last year. A mini reshuffle has taken place in Downing Street following the departure from government of James Heappey and Robert Halfon. We've heard in the last couple of hours that Nus Ghani becomes Minister for Europe. Leo Doherty is Minister for the Armed Forces to replace him. Kevin Hollinrake moves to be Minister for Business and Trade, and Luke Hall takes Education. Alan Mack becomes Under-Secretary of State in Business and Trade and the Cabinet Office. Chemical attack suspect Abdul Azidi was granted asylum in the UK by a judge despite concerns that the sex offender was a proven liar with a criminal past. A range of previously confidential documents show for the first time the lengths Azidi went to prove he was a Christian convert. Azidi's body was pulled from the River Thames last month amid a major manhunt after he was suspected of dousing his ex-girlfriend with a corrosive chemical. Julian Assange's wife says a decision to delay a final appeal on his extradition to the United States is utterly bizarre. US authorities have been asked to provide assurances on whether the WikiLeaks founder can rely on the American First Amendment, which provides a right to free speech, or whether he may face the death penalty. A further hearing will now be held in May. It's after the disclosure of national defence information relating to the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Stella Assange says today's delay is an attack on press freedoms.
What the courts have done have been to invite a political intervention from the United States, to send a letter saying it's all okay. I find this astounding. 5 years into this case, the United States has managed to show the court that their case remains an attack on press freedom, an attack on Julian's life.
Well, the latest news stories. For the top stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on the screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks very much for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. So alongside me, my panel, the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Good evening to both of you. And you know the drill date on this programme, it's not just about us three, it's very much about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with us all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you email me, or you can tweet me at GBNews. And yes, I know it's called X before you all start telling me. It's just not really moved on with that. For me, it will always be Twitter. Anyway, tell me your thoughts. Did you just see that horrendous situation there in the headlines? The collapse of that bridge in Baltimore. I mean, it is absolutely staggering. I'm not an overly religious person, I must confess. But sometimes I look at things and I think people must win out there, but for the grace of God go I. Of course, the Mayday call was issued, and luckily, lots of vehicles were actually stopped, prevented actually being on that bridge at that time. I mean, that disaster could have been much, much worse. Of course, they are still searching for people, and I obviously hope that we have the happiest ending that is possible. But it's just incredible, isn't it? You see it. It's like something out of a movie. Yeah, very sad. Anyway, let's move on and talk about matters that really have divided people. We're in a situation now where we've had had the first UN Security Council resolution that have called essentially for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, David Cameron has come under fire because, of course, one of the countries that voted for that was the UK. In fact, actually, out of the 15, 14 countries voted for it. The only one that didn't was the US. There's lots I want to unpick here. I want to look at whether or not these votes are meaningful or meaningless. I want to look at whether or not the UK was right to have voted in the way it did. And then there's a couple of interesting things that I want to bring it back to in this country about this conflict. But first of all, do you think the UK was right to vote the way that they did?
No, because I think it gives credence to a meaningless vote. And the US abstained, and with good reason, in my view, that this is resolution 2,728 from the UN. How much power have the previous 2,500 had? How much have they actually changed? And I think the UN should act when there are really important things that they can affect, and this is not one of them.
So what? You don't think they should have had the vote at all?
I think it's meaningless. That they don't have any power to back it up. It doesn't make any practical difference. Everyone has been calling for release of hostages and a ceasefire that can be made sustainable since this tragedy, a horrific incident, happened on the 7th of October. This isn't going to change anything, but I think by taking part, countries like the UK give it a credence it doesn't deserve.
James, do you agree with that?
No, not at all. Firstly, we have an international system where states try to uphold international law and security, and that's what's happened through this vote. And yes, of course, what's really required is the US and its little brothers like the UK and Germany to stop arming Israel so it is no longer able to carry on its genocidal assault on the people of Gaza. But there can be sanctions that are placed on Israel within the UN system if it fails to comply with a Security Council vote. So I think if we don't say that they're useless in all other circumstances, and fair enough, if Annunziata says that the UN Security Council is useless, full stop, then that is a position. But if you say that it has value in some circumstances, but not this, I mean, right now what is happening is an atrocious crime. More children have been killed in this conflict in the last 5 months than have been killed in all of the last 5 years in all the conflicts in the world. You have tens of thousands of innocents who have been killed. There are over 1 million people who face starvation, famine being used as a weapon of war. I think when something so large is happening, it would be ridiculous for the world itself, through the mechanisms that it has, to not be involved.
You not only are conveniently forgetting why Israel is doing this in Gaza, but also that, in fact, this resolution is calling, in the very first instance, on Hamas to release all of the hostages. They are not listening to the UN. It is therefore pointless for the UN to just pontificate when it can't actually do anything to make any difference.
Now, that argument would make some sense if you said everyone has to listen to the UN full stop, and therefore, by the same token, it's pointless telling Israel that it should stop using starvation as a weapon of war. In terms of getting the hostages released, the best way to do that is to have a negotiation to release the hostages. Of course, the hostages should be released. It is a crime to take civilians. But what has actually Hamas said? That they will negotiate for the hostages. Some have already been released, and there was an exchange. An exchange of prisoners.
There was.
And in the same period of time,
the prisoners on the other side are actual criminals. There is a very big difference.
No. That is not true. There are thousands. There are over 6,000 Palestinian political prisoners that have not faced trial, that are in administrative detention. Many of them are children. Many of them are young boys throwing a stone at a tank, or that sort of thing. Raided in their homes while they're being ethnically cleansed from the West Bank. These people are also hostages, and they should be released. The hostages, of course, should be released. There should be an exchange. But you do not need to continue the destruction of a people in order to have the hostages released.
So please tell me, the question was how important was this resolution? What difference has it made? What difference will it make? Aid, I agree with, but that should have been done anyway. But what difference does it make to the people of Gaza or the people of Israel as of now?
It does make a difference because what we have seen through this process is a moving of the line of the countries that support Israel and in the ways in which they do support Israel. That has an effect not only on those countries but also on businesses that are involved with Israel's war machine.
And the US did not support this resolution.
No, but for the first time, the US didn't veto
they
it.
did.
For the first time, they didn't veto it. And that in itself is significant. And the reason why they didn't veto it is because the unbelievable pressure that has been brought to bear in support of ending this destruction, both within the US, huge protests, many of them led by Jewish groups and organisations.
Oh, there have been horrific events alongside that.
How do you... horrific?
The anti-Semitic attacks that have rocketed, the arson attack that was just last week, that we are seeing a lot of violence that none of us want to see in our own countries.
No, of course.
An issue a long way away that we have a moral duty to support in, but not one to...
We have a moral duty. We are complicit in this conflict because Britain arms Israel and provides it diplomatic support and diplomatic cover.
And if they weren't able to protect themselves, Hamas would have achieved its aim of wiping Israel off the map.
Firstly, Israel can defend itself. That's the first point. Secondly,
well, not unless someone's providing it with arms.
Secondly, the reason why Hamas exists, the reason why there are resistance organisations in Palestine is because that is a colonial occupation that hasn't been resolved. For 75 years, the Palestinian people have been dispossessed and denied. They have been ethnically cleansed. They have been chased from their land.
That's why the UN is wasting its time. This is an incredibly complicated, long-standing, intractable issue where two lots of people do not want to live next door to each other. You can add lots more details to that, but that's the fundamental issue.
It's not very complicated. It's really not very complicated.
And the UN pontificating in this way is not going to change that at all.
It's not pontificate. Anyway, look, the argument about how much teeth the UN have, of course, I mean, not very much. We have a global system which is structured, basically, to permit things that shouldn't be happening to carry on happening. However, the fact that Mozambique, which drafted the resolution, got together the then non-permanent members of the Security Council to bring it forward, does show that the balance of world opinion is hugely on the side of a ceasefire, is hugely against the crimes that the State of Israel is committing now and has been committing for decades, and the moral pendulum has swung from now the global north to the global south. They are the ones that are leading on behalf of humanity as a whole, to stand against these crimes that are taking place, which are historic crimes and which are a stain on humanity as a whole.
But then what's going to stop this then? Because we can sit there and we can say that the UN resolution, is it meaningless, is it not? You know, people sitting in this country going on marches, and not just this country, but much broader than this country. What's actually going to draw a halt to this?
There are many things that people can do if they're sitting here. I mean, yes, of course, there's political pressure, there's going on marches. There are companies which are complicit in Israel's war machine, probably several hundred of them. Many people sitting at home will work in them. They may not know that they work in them. There are things that people can do in their workplace. There are things that people can do politically. There are things that people can do to blockade arms shipments, to put pressure on us to no longer send arms to Israel. All of these things have effect. All of these things which people have already been doing, very bravely doing all over the world, has got us to this point, where the British government started off by saying Israel can do what it likes, and now we've got a position where at least the Foreign Secretary is being criticised by the right of his party for voting for, you know, common sense and decency.
But everything you've just described then, when I said how do you stop it, everything you've just described then is to put pressure on Israel for them to stop their activity. Many people watching
They are doing the bombing. They are doing the starvation.
But many people,
they are doing the
many
crimes.
people watching this will say, well, actually, over in Gaza, people could come together and essentially try and root out Hamas. They could be putting pressure on, get rid of Hamas, put pressure onto Hamas to release...
In between ducking the bombs and eating grass.
Well, is it as simple as that, though? Is it as simple as every single person in Palestine is so oppressed and can't actually do anything to affect their outcomes? Is it? That's a question. It's not an insinuation.
No,
it's a question.
no. I mean, as well, the Palestinian people in Gaza, the West Bank, the refugee camps, East Jerusalem, in the diaspora, they, of course, struggle for their own national liberation and self-determination. Of course they do that every single day. But that they don't have to do that alone, especially when we are sitting here in a country which is complicit in these crimes that are taking place. I mean, really horrific crimes are taking place right now. The number of people who've died is going to expand horrifically when you look at the malnutrition, when you look, the weather is going to change and cholera is quite likely to break out. I mean, the humanitarian situation is extreme, and that's why it merits the kind of radical action.
I must say, and I know many people will disagree with me at home, I've never felt comfortable with all of these protests being described as hate marches and stuff like that, because I've always maintained so many people, just a normal, everyday people, I'm sure that there are some hate-filled people among them, but so many people, they see everything that's going on in Palestine, particularly when it comes to the children, and those children being killed and maimed and orphaned. And it just, I mean, I've got goosebumps even just saying that. It just galvanises your everyday person to take to the street and try and stop it. Where do you sit on it? And I want to bring it back to the UK after the break, because over in Luton, the Palestinian flag now has been flown from the town hall there in solidarity with Gaza. I can tell you now that has divided opinion. Where are you on that? You can see me, if you're just watching on the screen, you can see that is the flag being raised. Do you support that activity or not? And tell me why, either way. We'll come back to that in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Can the Church of England not spend their money as they wish?
The Church of England can do amazing things for this country and for the world, and I'm not sure why it's chosen to focus on this specific issue. You know, one of the causes that I've always thought the Church was very good at were things called almshouses, which were basically houses that would be built on church estates for the needy. Not only did they want to spend £100 million on this fund, that they wanted to spend £1 billion on reparations as well. But why not spend 100 million or £1 billion on a new generation of almshouses, as opposed to just helping one group of people, black British people? Why not just help all people in need?
Alex?
Well, I just don't understand what the Church of England is trying to do. It's on its deathbed.
Congregations have reduced. I mean, deathbed is maybe a little bit...
Look, if we look over 20 years, it's dramatically lower than it used to be. And a lot of criticism from actual Christians come from the values that the Church of England are now propagating. And Justin Welby has a lot to answer for, because, you know, not only are we seeing in the news this mass conversion of illegal immigrants to a gay mass system in the UK, but now we're seeing them spending money... And as Albie actually pointed out correctly, in a way that doesn't really benefit broader society, it benefits a very small group of people. So I just don't know where it's going to end. This committee has also said £1 million's not enough. It's 100 million, sorry.
Church commissioners are now hoping for a target of 1 billion.
I mean, it's woke nonsense, isn't it?
You could make the argument that this is charity. Justin Welby's job is to be a virtue signaller, is it not?
Charity discriminate? I mean, that's what he's saying. We're only going to give this to people from a specific skin colour or background. I don't think that's very Christian of them.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company at home till 7 o'clock tonight. We were just talking before the break about whether or not, or how, should I say, you could even get a ceasefire in Gaza, and whether or not the UK was right to vote along with that UN Security Council resolution. You can keep your thoughts coming in, but I also just want to bring the situation back to this country, because you might have seen in Luton, actually, in the town hall there, a flag was raised, the Palestinian flag was raised, to be precise. I'm just showing it to you on the screen as we speak. Alongside me, I've still got the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, to discuss. Annunziata, I can tell you now, this has really divided opinion and it's created quite strong emotion among people that are seeing that footage. Where are you on that?
I don't think we should have any foreign flags on public buildings. That whether it was Palestine or anywhere else, I think it's not the job of town halls to put up foreign nations' flags.
Under any circumstance, I do want to just be clear, so just in case you're not aware of the context of this, long story short, there was an event, a fundraising event that took place within that building to raise money for people that are affected in Gaza. The raising of that flag was essentially seen as a 24-hour thing to express solidarity with those peoples. That was the context. So you say that even in that situation, just a 24-hour thing?
Absolutely. I think it remains the flag of a foreign nation being put on a public building in the UK. And it's one thing if you are greeting a specific dignitary and you put all the flags down the Mall for them to go to Buckingham Palace. But on public buildings, we should refrain.
And do you extend that to things like that because the Ukrainian flag was popping up everywhere and still is in a lot of places?
I think it is better to just be completely equal across the board and not put up foreign flags.
James?
I completely respect that position because I do think in general terms it is odd to have the flags of foreign countries on public, but not just town halls. I mean, on government ministries, projected onto Parliament and so on and so forth. I think in general terms it's odd. I think given that it is allowed and that this is for 24 hours, it's a perfectly reasonable thing in the context of the fact that it's allowed. And I think if you take Annunziata's line, then that's completely fine and correct, i.e. you say the Israeli flag shouldn't be flown, the Ukrainian flag shouldn't be flown, the anything else flag shouldn't be flown. But if you have selective outrage over the Palestinian flag being flown for 24 hours during a fundraiser for a charity for humanitarian aid, but you don't mind the Israeli flag outside the health ministry, as it was after the 7th of October, or the Ukrainian flag, then you're saying more about your own position rather than what you actually think.
And I think that is absolutely why I wouldn't let any go up at all. Because you're picking sides, you're making them political when they're actually there to just serve the British public, whatever their views.
Well, you're Jewish, and I wonder if there are any Jewish people living in Luton, how that would make those people feel, because I imagine that for some Jewish people, that could potentially be seen as quite intimidatory.
It's not intimidatory. The flag of Palestine...
Well, it's not intimidatory to you, but for other people it might be.
OK, but firstly, you don't have a right to be incorrectly offended. You know, you can't say, well, I don't like flowers and you've got a flower pot over there, therefore you've offended me, and just because you've known that sometimes I don't like flower pots, by having one, you've offended me. The flag...
This is a bit... Come on. That's a bit disingenuous. Isn't the same as sticking a flower pot?
The Palestinian flag poses no threat whatsoever to Jewish people as Jewish people. If you are an Israeli supremacist who wishes to see the ethnic whose goal is annexation, whose method is ethnic cleansing, and his excuse is self-defense, then OK, fine, you won't like it, but we don't have to kowtow to supremacism. It's a flag that represents a people, that's fine.
Yeah, but the flip side of that will be that some people will see this as an Islamist supremacy, if you like, sitting there and going, we've now managed to get this flag.
Then they are ignorant. Then they are ignorant. The flag of Palestine is not a supremacist flag. It isn't saying that only Palestinian people can exist in the world. It's not saying that everybody has to be Muslim. I mean, Palestine is a multi-confessional people anyway. I mean, there are Christian Palestinians, there were Jewish Palestinians. I mean, there are those of all faiths and none.
Well, you tell me what you think to it at home. You can have the final say on that. I know that there will be very strong opinions. What I would personally like to see is pack in with all any other country's flag flying. And actually, I'd like to see more of our flags flying on public buildings all the time, quite frankly. I think we should actually have a little bit more pride in our own nation's flag. But there you go. You will have strong opinions. I'm not. I'm absolutely sure of that. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you reach me. Let's talk housing. The UK's housing is apparently the worst value for money of any advanced economy. This is looking at things like the size of the property, so square footage, the ages of the property, what you're getting for your bang for your buck, really. Where are you on why you think this is the case?
Well, I think that these findings are potentially taken slightly out of context, that on the expense side, they estimated because the UK has so many more home owners than the countries it was being compared to. They couldn't compare costs.
Yeah.
But our housing stock is clearly limited, and that has been inflated in cost because we haven't allowed more houses to be built. And we have got to... Government after government has said, we will build 100,000 houses a year, 300,000 houses a year, and it never happens, whilst our population does nothing but grow.
Yeah, but why is it not happening?
Because we need a massive reform of planning laws. The planning system in this country is so over-regulated, it is so overcomplicated, and we should be encouraging people to be able to build small developments, not just the clever big landowners who want to build 200 homes, 5,000 homes, and can jump through all the hoops that are put in the way of building houses that inflate the cost of building those houses, and so along with restricting in supply, inflate further the cost to everyone of living in them.
James?
So I agree with some of that, and we do need more houses to be built, and there are reforms to planning that could help do that. But if anybody says, and most of the debate on this issue seems to only focus on the number of houses that can be built, as if the number of homes per capita had been falling massively in this country, which actually it hasn't. I mean, and if you look at comparable countries, we're at the lower end of the range, but we're not, you know, our per capita ones is a bit lower than the Netherlands, for example, which is a pretty densely populated, small country near us, similar levels of wealth, and so on. So there are other issues for why we have such extremely expensive housing, and it is extremely expensive. The average rent is something like £1,300 a month. Tenants in the last year that there are records for, 2022, paid £89 billion in rent to landlords. This is, that's money that people aren't saving for their deposit to buy their own home, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of big policy interventions that are required. The first is to have many more social housing, rent at social rent, keeping that down. The second is there needs to be private sector rent controls. It's not possible to carry on rising at the rate. The third is there need to be strong tax disincentives towards holding property only for investment and it not being used for homes, which is one of the things that you see. And one of the ways in which you could fund these policies wouldn't involve raising taxes or anything like that at all. There's over £4 billion which are in tenants' deposits, private sector tenants, their deposits, which are registered with a tenancy deposit scheme. You could take that money and use that to capitalise a housing policy bank, which could then lend to councils to build, to developers to build homes, which could be used for if you wanted, for mortgages if mortgage rates were going up, or to subsidise things. And you could use that bank to capitalise a housing policy bank to deliver the kinds of quantity of house building that we need in the types of tenure that we need.
So you're going to take the tenant's deposit?
Yeah.
And you're going to be lending those on a much longer term basis? Because a lot of tenancies are quite short term tenancies.
So you take the deposits as a whole, which is over 4 billion.
Yeah.
And say when I move out of my flat, I'll get my deposit back, but someone else will move into my flat and they'll put the deposit in. So it's a stable amount, which you then use as your capitalisation to lend out.
Some people will be saying it sounds a bit like a glorified Ponzi scheme that does to people.
No, that's not. It's not a Ponzi scheme in the slightest. What you're doing.
It's not risk-free. But if we had rent controls, no one would rent out houses because they'd still have to cover the repairs, the mortgages, all the other costs associated with renting out a property, buying it in the first place, and there would be no landlords because they wouldn't be able to cover their costs. And that would make it harder for all the tenants, not easier by any stretch of the imagination. The UK does have one of the smallest per capita housing stocks, as you mentioned, that if you look at comparable countries in Europe, second homes account for 22% in Spain, 17% in Finland, 9% in France. We've only got 4%, and yet there is so much discussion on penalising second homeowners because they're using up an extra house. I don't have two houses, in case declare no interest in this one at all. But we actually have a very small number of them compared to the other developed countries. And we do just need to build more.
There's a couple of different factors that we're not discussing. Greed. You know, when you look at properties that are up for sale at the moment and you actually look at the asking price of the current property and then you look at the purchase price and the gulf between the two, and I can't help but wonder what is driving this sale price other than greed of an estate agent trying to maximise their commission, and of course, understandable, some might say, profit motivation of the person doing the selling. Also, as well, something I worry about is these HMOs, there's companies like Serco now popping up, offering very lucrative tenancies to tenants like asylum seekers, where you're taking properties now, you're splitting them into multiple dwellings. I think that, personally, is a recipe for disaster for a number of reasons. What do you think to the housing situation, GB Views? At gbnews.com is how you get hold of me tonight. Your thoughts very much welcome. After the break, I want to talk to you. Do you think digitisation of pretty much everything now is excluding people? Age UK says it's absolutely excluding the elderly. But what about those that are not tech savvy as well? Do you all feel alienated or not? And also criminals. Do you think they should have to don high-vis jackets, get out into their communities and fix what they did wrong? Or is that a little bit too humiliating? You tell me.
Hi there, time to look at the Met Office forecast for GB News. Rain and hill snow across northern parts of the UK during the next 24 hours. Showers moving in elsewhere, although interspersed by at least some brighter interludes. Low pressure still well and truly in charge. That low mainly sitting towards the southwest of the UK, and it is sending a band of rain north during the evening into Northern Ireland, where some wet weather could cause issues, rain warning in force, as well as central and northern England, parts of Wales, and then eventually that rain moves into Scotland, where it mixes with cold air to give some snow above 200 or 300 metres. The far north stays dry but chilly, and further south, some clear spells, although the next area of rain moves in by dawn to affect southwest England, Wales, Northern Ireland as well. Heavy downpours, gusty winds, and then that rain, well, it tends to turn to showers as it moves into central UK by the afternoon. Further showers arrive later from the southwest with gusty winds, hail and thunder. A lively afternoon, although with some pretty clouds in the sky. Now, in the far north, we're going to see wet and windy weather remain until Thursday morning, and then Thursday starts off bright across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, for England and Wales, a blustery start with further heavy rain to come, followed by showers, and those showers developing fairly widely as we go into the Easter weekend. I suspect Good Friday, Saturday and Easter Day. Mostly, we're going to see sunny spells and showers before more prolonged rain on Monday.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel remain. I've got the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Welcome back, everybody. Audrey was just saying we've just been talking about whether or not the Palestinian flag should be flying on top of Luton Town Hall. So many of you say no, and the reason that you're saying no is you think that actually no foreign country's flag should be flying on a public building. Audrey says, Michelle, she says she can't even fly a flag in her own garden without planning permission. I have to say, I didn't actually realise that was the case, and you've just been updating me, Annunziata, so I appreciate that. I didn't realise that if you wanted to stick a flag up with your flagpole and stuff, you had to get planning permission to do that. How bizarre. You learn something new every day, but that sentiment is really coming through. Let me ask you this, by the way. Did you have that sentiment when it was the Ukrainian flags that were getting flown on different buildings? Tell me, gbviews@gbnews.com. I want to talk to you now, though, about whether or not people are being alienated from lots of different aspects of society, really, because of digitisation. Age UK, they're raising the alarm about elderly people, saying it's almost impossible now for them to do it. A lot of elderly people will be watching this shouting, how dare you, because I'm a whiz with technology. So I'm not sure it's always an age thing, as opposed to a technical competency thing, perhaps.
I agree with that. I think there are young people who, for whatever reason, don't understand or don't like using tech. I'm slightly suspicious of Age UK's estimate that around 1 in 5 over 65s do not use the internet. That does seem exceedingly high. Well, unless I know incredibly technologically advanced over 65-year-olds, all of whom seem to contact each other on WhatsApp and email all the time. But I think there is, however, a really serious issue about leaving people behind and preventing them from accessing services that they need. And whether it is only being able to order prescriptions online or whether it is only being able to pay for parking with a smartphone, you are constantly limiting who can get hold of those services. I think we've got to be realistic that we are heading to a fully digitalised world, but that there must be, in the interim, support for people who could otherwise completely drop off the system.
Is that fair, James?
I think it's fair, and I would take it a little bit further, because I think it's not just in public services, but also in commercial services. The use of digitisation and automation can either be something which is win-win-win for everyone. It makes the service cheaper to run, it makes the people who are running the service, it makes their life easier, and the people who use the service, it makes their life easier. But that is not always the case, and quite often it's the case is it makes the service user basically do some of the work that service provider used to do or that company used to do. You have chatting with the chatbot about your problem, not being able to speak to a person, all of these various things. So I think, especially when it's public services, of course, companies, if they can get away with externalising costs onto their consumers, they will do so. But public services shouldn't be doing that, especially when the way in which it happens is going to happen in a way with a distributional impact. Some people are going to be impacted very badly, other people less so. So I think for all of these processes, it's not just having checks to not leave people behind, but to see, is this actually something which makes the service better for users, or is it essentially a cost-cutting exercise which puts...
I'm wholeheartedly in favour of government departments and local councils cutting costs.
Yeah.
This seems very sensible, but not if it's at the cost of the taxpayers getting to the services they require.
Well, we say about cutting costs, but so many public sector projects that are all about digitising and IT, they go completely wrong. And then we end up having to pick up the tab as the taxpayer, so they don't actually save us that much money in some cases, I can tell you. Many people are getting in touch about the housing thing. Peter said, Michelle, it's simple. We don't need more houses. We need to basically stop the population growth rising as quickly as it is. I completely agree with you on that one. Barbara, oh, you're going to upset a few people, Barbara. She says, it's simple, Michelle. The problem is when it comes to housing is that young people keep wasting their money on nightlife, booze, fashion, holidays and anything else other than money for a deposit. Barbara, you're a brave woman. I can hear the young shouting back at you. I can tell you that for free. Colin says, Michelle, simple. We can charge 10 times the amount of council tax on all empty properties. That, he says, will focus the miners. They're already trying, aren't they? They're floating a few different ideas about potentially increasing council tax on empty properties in a few different places. But doesn't that actually kind of undermine the whole council tax system in some way? Isn't it a little bit unfair? I don't know. If you want to leave your property empty, isn't that up to you? Get in touch and tell me your thoughts. Again, this sentiment is coming through thick and fast, that you do not think that foreign flags should be flying across any public building. I'll ask you again, did you think that when it was the Ukrainian flag that was popping up all over the place or not? After the break, my favourite topic, I've been desperate to talk to you about this for a few days now. When a criminal commits a crime and they have to go into the community to serve their sentence, should they be given these high-vis jackets made to stand out, an element of humiliation, if you will, while they clean up their communities? I say yes. What says you?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Yeah, well, when it comes to fish and chips, we all know they're a part of a British tradition, and the Golden Chippy is an award-winning restaurant, and for years they've been serving the community here in Greenwich, and even today on a Sunday they are fully packed today. But this is the issue. Here we've got a mural and which says a great British meal. Residents who live in this area who've complained to Greenwich Council, who say it's inappropriate considering it's in a conservation area. Here's what some of the local people we've been speaking to had to say.
What's wrong with it? It looks all right, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Look at some left graffiti they've got around in Greenwich. They don't want to take that down, do they? But when you've got something like this, it's half decent, they want to remove it.
Fantastic artwork. I really like it. Reminds me of Banksy.
Well, those are the views here from people who live in this local area. But I'm kindly joined by Chris, the owner. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. You've been here for 20 years now. Tell me how this issue has come up.
They take pictures. It's only been up for about a month. And it's been very, very popular. I don't want to believe that any of the locals are complaining that this is too loud or anything like that. They say it needs planning permission. How a little thing like this needs planning permission, I don't know.
Are you working with an artist in this local area?
I've got a local guy that does murals, so he said, would you like me to do something for you? I said, yes, why not? I said, make sure you leave a bit of space for people to stand there so they can take some selfies or pictures or whatever they want to do from Golden Chippy. And it's been extremely popular, and not one person has come to me and said, that looks terrible. So I cannot imagine the person that complained about this. I think it's just council.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you until 7 o'clock tonight. A row's broken out, everybody. I've got the former Brexit Party MEP, Nunziata Rees-Mogg, alongside me, the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. But Ian, one of my viewers, you confused everyone, Ian, because before the break we were saying, well, not me, Nunziata was saying that you need planning permission to get a flagpole in. Ian's having none of it. He says he works in local planning, and actually you don't need planning permission. Nunziata, you're not having any of that. I think the jury is still out. We're now talking about meters and how high is too high for a flagpole. I'm going to let you guys fight that out in your own time. Lots of people responding as well to one of my viewers, Barbara, Barbara basically said that it's the young people's fault they can't get on the housing ladder. Carol, you're not having any of what Barbara's saying, because Carol's saying, Barbara, we all did the same when we was young. We enjoyed our lives, she says, but the houses weren't the price that they are now. You didn't need the deposit that is equivalent now. And she says, look at the house market, look at the wages. It's a different league, she says. Oh, you're a feisty bunch tonight. I like it. Let's talk, shall we, criminals, because offenders now potentially will have to don these high-vis jackets to get out into the community and fix things like graffiti and all the rest of it. Of course, there was a trial about this that went well, and now they're going to roll it out. Of course, if you ask me, it's all about freeing up prison space. I think this is a wonderful idea, this whole notion that you'll have this high-vis jacket on, you'll be identified as a criminal. Brilliant. Do you like it?
I think it's absolutely a brilliant idea and fully support it. And not particularly because it embarrasses people or shames them, but because if you have damaged your community by doing whatever crime it might be that has led you to this point, then you should be made to pay back in some way and demonstrate that you can support your community and be part of it and part of making it better. And I think this is a wonderful scheme to do that.
James?
I would like to see the evidence that it reduces reoffending and that it reduces antisocial behaviour at all, rather than make whoever is the Justice Secretary this week seem tough by putting in words like chain gangs. I don't think that sounds particularly like it's been...
I don't think that was his word, because it's not attributed with a direct quote.
It is.
I don't know who has said that.
In the first sentence, it's chain gangs in inverted commas, which therefore must come from the government's briefing, given they've handed the story to the Telegraph. So I don't think chain gangs are a good idea. In general terms, people paying back to their community, cleaning things, etc. That's all very well and good. Agree with that. I would like to see the evidence that this reduces reoffending and it doesn't backfire at all. If you remember when New Labour went very big on ASBOs and
hugging hoodies,
and that I think David Cameron was the one who said he wanted to hug a hoodie. He didn't actually say.
Society.
He didn't actually say he wanted. Anyway, we're going into the history that we probably all want to forget, but with the ASBOs anyway,
I think
a lot of it was an attempt to get tough,
I think it's highly
backfired.
unlikely to increase reoffending rates, but I think it would help people. That often out-of-control lives is a reason people end up in particularly pettier crimes, and I'm assuming this is not designed for mass murderers, but for those who've shoplifted or the lower end of the crime spectrum. And in fact, having a kind of very regular routine, having something you have to do every day is proven to really help that. And I think it might well help reduce reoffending not because they are embarrassed or ashamed to be out in public being, quote, humiliated, but because they discover that there can be a pattern to life that you can live by.
That might very well be right. And if the story were presented in that way, I would be far more likely to think that someone has looked at some evidence and made the sort of argument that you've made. But when it's done with, we're going to humiliate them because we're putting them in high vis, it sounds like it's oh, look, we've got a day in the grid for justice. What should we do? Oh, I think I can get a page in the
I am not going
to
defend the government's PR machine.
But, I mean, I agree that things that help people get back into structured life, support for community, that give people skills and, some hope, some things to look forward to are very good. I don't get the feeling that that's where this is coming from. It could be, we don't know what's the underlying policy that sits behind the the newsy top line with chain gangs. We don't know if that's actually what the minister said or what a press officer thought would get a good headline in the Telegraph. We don't know.
I don't like the notion of chain gangs, but I absolutely, and I don't even care about the reoffending rates. So, is that why we should be deciding on a policy or not? I actually think that if these criminals understand that actually you will be shamed if you're a criminal, you will be laughed at, you will be mocked, then maybe, just maybe, it might even stop. Even if it just stops one of them, just one of them.
That's to do with reoffending and offending in the first place. But again, let's see the evidence. The evidence that ASBO stopped that kind of the kind of behaviour that you got an ASBO for was not well founded. I mean, there was a decade of academic research.
Well, yeah, I do actually remember some young kids that actually thought that an ASBO was a badge of honour. They absolutely loved it. I can remember a story about some twins, actually, a set of twins. I'm sure I remember that. In fact, actually, I think one of the viewers got in touch with me related to those twins. I'll have to dig deep into my memory to remember that story. But you know what? A little bit tougher on criminals wouldn't go amiss if you ask me. What do you make to it all? Wayne says, Michelle, we have high vis with these people, and we've been doing it for ages. It's the South. They just need to catch up on this. It's not a new policy, he says. Well, there you go. Look, thank you very much, guys, for your company tonight. Thank you at home. Do not go anywhere because Nigel Farage is up next, but that's it from me. Night-night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.